The Articulate Coven is the original, unofficial podcast and fan community for Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire and Anne Rice's Immortal universe from AMC and AMC+. Welcome to The Articulate Coven, the unofficial podcast and fan community for Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, Mayfair Witches, and AMC's Immortal universe, which includes both those series and hopefully more to come in the future. We are your hosts. I am Joel.
I'm Ashley.
And we are The Articulate Coven, and we are talking about books, Ashley.
Yes, we are.
Before we started recording, actually, we were talking about some of the books we've been reading lately, and we're reading all sorts of stuff.
We are.
Everything except vampires, pretty much, currently.
Everything except vampires. It's wild. But I went on a tear, I guess back in the summer, maybe, or maybe it was in, maybe around the fall, the beginning of fall. But, I was able to unlock my reading superpower that I had as a child, which was that I could read any book in a day, I could just cover to cover. And I just got on a tear. I finally finished Armand. I don't know why it was a harder read for me. It's a different read as an adult. It's just very different. And then after that, I was like, fucking time for Pandora. And that's my favorite. And that book reads so fast for me. So I read that in just a few hours. And then I was like, Blood and Gold, let's do this. And so I read 3 books in 4 days. It was fantastic.
That is amazing. God.
Yeah. That was weird.
That was just a normal week for us when we were 10, 11, 12, 16.
You and I were totally that kid that could I was gonna stay up until the book was done.
I'm looking it up right now because I got to tell you exactly why I had a problem getting through the Vampire Armand this most recent reread when I did. Okay, so far, I've been doing audiobooks for all of these so far in our episodes. I say that's not entirely true. When we discussed Interview with the Vampire, I had read about half of it on my Kindle, and then I did half of it as an audiobook, so I did some of both. But Simon Vance voiced all of the audiobooks so far in the Vampire Chronicles until this one.
It's terrible.
The Vampire Armand is narrated in Audible, at least, by Jonathan Marotz, and I had never heard him before, and he seems to be fine. He does, by the way, voice the audiobook adaptation of Vittorio the Vampire, which probably means I will be reading that on my Kindle, if I'm very honest with you.
Yeah. I had the same thing. I had this on audiobook too, and I tried to listen to it. It just didn't hit me right. I don't know. And maybe it is because Simon Vance is so fucking great. Tale of the Body Thief was such a good listen. It's just so great.
This wonderfully lush European generic accent, right? What is Lestat's accent even supposed to be? He's lived so many lives, right? And Lestat's not even your only narrator. Oftentimes he's, recanting recounting other people's flashbacks and stories that the voice is sort of theirs, et cetera, et cetera. But still, he reads it all in this very thick, layered, beautiful accent. And then this fella just didn't. It's this, and again, Armand's even more of a European character in my mind than Lestat is. Lestat obviously came from Europe, but to me, and he says it in the novels, he's a very American character.
Right. He's very, he's French, but he's American,
Yeah, the brashness and the rogue, the very Brat Prince idea is who says we're a monarchy? That's very much an American feeling. And he is as much based off of noir detectives as he is, Dracula or some old world vampire figure. Anyway, the same thing happens, by the way. I just want to go ahead and give you a preview in the final novel. When you get there, if you get to Blood Canticle, it's read by Eric Quinn Shaw, Christopher's friend, and Eric was also a friend of Anne. And Eric does a fine job. But again, he does not try the accent at all. And it's just jarring. And it's a letdown if you're used to the other books. So
the woman who reads Pandora is fantastic. The audiobook of Pandora is amazing. I remember specifically, I listened to it on tape driving from Ruston, Louisiana to North Carolina, just Blowing Rock, North Carolina, when I was working here one summer. And I listened to that audiobook on that drive, and it was so good. And I listened to it again this round, and it is just as good as I remembered it being.
That's exciting, and very much going to be an uptick from this Armand novel.
Yes.
Something that occurred to me listening to our fans talk about their own experiences, and then us rereading these books for the first time in a long time for both of us, generally. When we were those precocious children that we joked about reading, 4 books in a week or whatever.
Right.
When we first discovered Anne, when we raced through these novels for the first time, we heard her. We heard what she was saying. And both of us have talked about in this show and elsewhere how Anne opened us up to ideas and concepts and theologies and philosophies that we never would have been exposed to probably otherwise. So it wasn't like we weren't paying attention. But now as adults, it's not only that I feel like we are hearing her, but we are listening to why she is saying the things that she says. I never questioned why certain narratives, certain tropes are dealt with and addressed again and again and again by multiple characters throughout Anne's writing. And now in my rereading, I'm psychoanalyzing Anne in some ways.
Right, absolutely.
Backwardsly. And I don't think that's wrong, particularly for an author that you know as well as you and I know Anne and her work. But this novel particularly made me question.
Well, it's the same sort of thing like when I read Stephen King, who is another favorite author of mine, like probably my number one favorite author of all time. And when I read him, I listen and I understand and I know the characters, but I also feel like I've been in this relationship with this man for so many years of my life, And so I see him and his thoughts and how he's feeling about things or how he thinks about things coming through that, and how that's changed over time. And that's one of the cool things about these authors that we love that are so prolific and have written so much over such a good period of time, is that we get to see kind of how they grow and change and their perspective on things changes. And I think that's a really cool part of being a constant reader.
I don't think that I don't think it should belittle someone's interest or worth or anything if they don't consider this sort of thing. But for me, this discussion that we're having right now is why I find it so difficult to separate the work from the creator themselves. When you have somebody canceled or you find out kind of a shocking thing about a different creator that you've cared about, I do find it difficult to remove that from the work because their work is inherently
them.
Yes, it's particularly as an author. Like that's very, very true as an author. You think about Stephen King is a good example just because he's lived his life so publicly, even more so I think maybe than Anne did. Anne was very public as a figure, but her day-to-day life seemed much more private, I think, than King's has often been. In particular, we watched King nearly be killed in a car accident and then go through that overcome it. Yeah. But now he's got a pain pill addiction and he's fighting with opioids again for the first time.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, oh man, all of the...
And if you know him, you've been through that with him already. Like, we've already done this, bro. But it's really cool because... Not cool. That's a dumb way to phrase that. But it's really interesting how that is fucking true in life. Like, if you have addicts in your life, if you love an addict, it's a cycle and you go through it again sometimes, and that's part of it. And fighting through that and pushing through that and coming out on the other side is part of what makes life fucking awesome and beautiful and worth fighting for. You know what I mean? Like, not to get all like, I don't know, up on my whatever, but it's just one of those things. It's like, it's you feel the healing that they're doing through the art, through the work, through the words. Absolutely. And that's fucking awesome. And it's a cool thing because it makes you feel less alone out there in the world.
Yeah. Well, and it allows us to see ourselves not only in the narrative themselves, right? We can see our struggles as humans or our failures or our flaws or whatever in the character of Lestat or the character of Louis or the character of Armand. But also we can see ourselves in the meta narrative with the author over the course. I mean, I think specifically about Anne, that's absolutely been the case, that my own religious walk,
right? I was thinking that
has mirrored hers in some way. We haven't walked in step with one another, and yet we've both danced across that line a few different times for different reasons. But, you know, always a search for, I think, the same sort of thing, which is like, honestly, it's our position in the universe. Like,
right. And a yearning to understand, understand why we're here, what we're here for, what's our purpose, what's next, you know, like all of those questions. I think that's just a piece of the human condition, and to be able to go through all that with people, you know, with characters, with fictitious characters, with an author, with other people who are passionate about the same things that speak to us, you know, it has made, I mean, it literally makes your life richer.
Well, and it's literally the story of this novel in a lot of ways. It is Armand is playing out in this one book as Anne's, you know, figure as she searches for her own purpose. That's all that Armand does in this novel. He's just desperate for a reason for his being and for all this sojourn that he's been on for, you know, 500, 600 years by the time this novel is over. And I don't know. I found him more sympathetic in this reading than I've ever found him before. I still don't care for him personally. Armand and I would not be friends. I very much feel about him, I think, like Lestat does. I love him. And yet, you know, like...
Right. It's, you know, when I first read Interview, I was in love with Armand. Like, I loved
it's Louis' eyes, right? It's Louis' gaze.
You're seeing him through Louis' eyes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I was just infatuated. And then, even though the casting was fucking horrible, Antonio Banderas playing Armand was a sexy cup of Spanish deliciousness that we all deserved to enjoy.
And if you take away the physical descriptions of the character and you just say, who is Armand in our story? He is this desire of Louis for both a physical and emotional and romantic companion, but also a mentor and leader, a purpose, a shining beacon to show him which way to head and how to be now. And
everything
Antonio
that
Banderas
Lestat could not do.
Yes.
Everything that Lestat could not be for him.
He's also like so opposite to Tom Cruise's physical portrayal in the film, right? So I think that was, if you look at that, again, like we've said with some of the things that they've changed in this series, in retrospect, I think that casting choice was very apt because of what they wanted Armand to do in their story. They weren't thinking about Armand's story. They were thinking about Louis' story in that moment. So it fit.
Yeah, teenage Ashley did not give a fuck that he did not have curly red hair and look like a little cherub angel. She was like, holy shit, this Spanish man. You know, like,
burn me
hell
with that
yes.
candle, baby.
Yeah, hell yes. So I had this like passion for Armand, I guess is probably a better way to say it right off the bat, you know. And then you go through Interview, you go through the Vampire Lestat, and you go through that journey, and then you go through, you know, just the more you get to know him and the way other people see him, he's very desirable. But he, to me, sometimes is more of a brat than Lestat, you know, like he's so petulant and so, but then also I think about how young he was, you know, when he was turned, and even though he's he's a millennia old, he's still at the core is this like lost boy searching for what's next.
Yeah, the perpetual child. It's a really interesting companion to the Claudia character. And I do wonder how young is Armand going to be in his origin as a vampire in this series. You know, the actor is not that young, but I mean, you could tell me that he was, you know, 20 when he was turned or something like that.
Also, that man is delicious. Like, I've been looking at the whole time we were talking about the whole time we were recording our last episode talking about the upcoming season, I literally just had pictures up, scrolling through them of these gorgeous, gorgeous vampires. And what a delight. He's very well cast. Again, not necessarily looking like our Botticelli Armand, but still just like really good casting. He feels very, at times he looks just very tortured, and that's, I think, a real part of Armand that gets sort of overlooked sometimes when we're thinking about him, at least when I'm thinking about him as a character.
Well, okay. Just as I said earlier about how Antonio Banderas was an aptly cast Armand for what they were trying to do in that film, I was thinking about this very same thing with our Armand here in the series. What does our Louis want and need? One of the things that we already know for a fact that he wants is a true companion, someone who sees the world from the same vantage point that he does. And here I mean specifically a person of color. And our Armand in this series is a person of color.
Yes.
Not the same background as our Louis, right? But also, we already know, of a religious upbringing and background too. So these are two characters born to darkness now, and yet they come from a devout religious faith. They each have their own sort of interesting and difficult journey with that religion, and they both are walking through, the early 1900s Earth as men of color.
And they both have very complicated relationships with their creators.
Yes, right.
That's another thing that they share. They both have these very kind of like difficult, sort of tortured kind of thing with their creator.
And again, opposite physically to our Lestat. This Armand is shorter than Sam Reed. This Armand is smaller than Sam Reed all over. And obviously, as I said, not white and blonde. So I do think that there's something to be said about Armand being, I mean, again, if you look at Anne's writing or you listen to her talking about these characters, Lestat is always her first love. She's got a deep and abiding love for Louis. She, like Lestat, falls in love at times with David Talbot and with Marius. She does, and it's not that all of her children are her favorites, right? I'm sure. But she does not feel that same way about Armand. Armand is at a remove. Armand is about what Armand provides to these other characters, because they are the loves and the focuses of Anne's attention and imagination.
This is someone, too, who always holds their thrall, though. Like, they can always keep them. Somehow, he has something about him that keeps them at least a little bewitched. Even Lestat, they are very, they have a very contentious relationship and what have you, but they do have some, like, underlying very, very intense feelings for each other.
Well, I think if Armand were a different person, Lestat would have fallen as deeply in love with Armand as he did with Louis. It was like Armand, at least in the novel, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the series, especially because it seems like we're going to hear it from Armand's perspective first. How did Armand open himself up to that? Did Armand pursue Lestat in the same way that we know Lestat was looking for answers and power and all of the things that Armand could have provided, but didn't want to? Armand was closed off and not willing to change. You mentioned,
and he was
earlier,
in that very he wasn't. If Lestat met the Armand that Louis met, this would be a very different relationship.
I think it would have gone very similarly to how Louis and Armand's do
Absolutely,
in the novel.
I think so too.
They lived together for years and then drifted apart as Louis basically outgrew Armand effectively.
Right. And I think that like the Armand he meets is so like disappointing to him. Remembering when he comes upon them and they're all just in rags and everyone, they're, these old outdated thoughts and things like that, and these old stupid traditions that he knows are bullshit. And it's just like not what he wanted or was expecting to find, Yeah.
Well, I mean, especially, Lestat's birthed into darkness by Magnus, who is like literally a physical monster to behold, and also he's an alchemist and a wizard, and he makes Lestat, and then he immediately jumps into the flame, and he's like,
right,
way,
thank you.
A fortune in the basement. Bye, baby.
Deuces.
scatter my ashes.
Here's some gold. Throw me in the yard.
So, I mean, like, yeah, he was woken up in, like, a whole different world, and then he finally finds some other vampires, because for a while he's, like, in despair. He's like, oh, that was the only one. I'll never know what I'm supposed to do or whatever. And then he sees other vampires, and he's like, you're superstitious? Like, you caught me in the
What
church.
is this bullshit?
Obviously, it's not a problem for us to be there. Anyway, so here's a thing that you mentioned, though, earlier about Lestat and Armand being similar in the fact that they're both brats. The difference, and this is the fundamental difference that I think makes Lestat more appealing to me, and I think more appealing to Anne, and it goes back to that wandering religious journey and philosophical journey that we were talking about her having in her life. Lestat is never afraid to change his mind. Lestat is never afraid to adopt a new idea or behavior or concept. And yes, that makes him a little unstable, and it definitely makes him frustrating for the elders all through his story. But it also continually keeps him right. Like, as new information comes, as new things happen, Lestat changes what he does. And some of the other vampires, most of the other vampires are slow to do so.
Absolutely. And Lestat never gets tired of searching for more meaning. You know, like, he loves people. He loves humans. He loves humanity. He loves emotions. He loves everything that makes the world a rich and interesting and challenging and scary place. He loves all of that. And he's entranced by all of that, you know? And Armand is not like that. Armand has seen a lot of the horrible things in the world and has experienced a lot of horrible things in his life as a young man and also as a vampire, you know, like, so I don't think he doesn't have as much whimsy and as much, like, excitement about things as Lestat does. I think that's something that I love so much about our Brat Prince, is that he's just about the experience.
That is boy, you could put that on the cover of his memoir. Lestat, he's just about the experience.
Just about the experience.
What do the kids say now? I did it for the plot.
Yeah.
He did it for the plot. Okay, so here's the thing. You mentioned it earlier about Antonio Banderas' casting. It's probably, it occurs to me now, colored somewhat by that casting. I always think of Armand as a child of the Italian Renaissance. I think about him as Italian, and I'm sure it's because of his time with Marius in Italy, and because that's where I feel like his origin is. This book, of course, makes it clear he's a Northeastern European kid. You know, he's a Ruski, effectively, on the border of what would one day become Russia. Here, I just want to go right off the top here. This entire book is about iconography. Armand starts, you know, the story basically as an incredibly gifted painter. It's the reason why he's intriguing to those around him as he's tossed about in his early life. It's the reason why he draws Marius's attention eventually. How are they going to do any of that justice when our Armand is of a religion that does not believe in icons? Correct me, please, listeners, if I'm speaking out of turn here or incorrectly in some way. I mean, I know that the Islamic faith does not allow for depictions of the prophet, but do they allow for icons of any kind, saints and such?
I am woefully uneducated.
So. I mean, I don't believe they do.
But I will say this, the idea of, you know, and you and I just having such a different experience with religion in our lives, I totally think that is something that can lift right out. Like, that doesn't seem as important to me.
Well, so I've got a line here towards the end of the novel. Where is it? Is there anyone now that needs to ask me what an icon means to me? And it's when he's finally caught up with the modern day, and he's talking about
the veil,
discovery of Veronica's veil. Yeah, at the end of Knock the Devil.
Okay, so this is part of it too. I think all of that I find that whole section very upsetting when it happened, but also I find it just rings hollow to me. It never seemed like that was what it was about, like proving, I don't know, like I have this very, I don't know. It's my hang up with like not being as committed to religion. I think that I'm just like, I don't think that that's why he did it.
I do think that it is entirely possible that this series, when we get to Memnoch, takes out the sort of end of that book storyline where, a modern day Christian revival happens effectively because we've discovered the true veil. So I do imagine you could take that out. I do wonder, though, how you get this story of Armand without it being sort of this like religious, tragic epic. It seems so central. And I suppose you could do some of that with the Islamic faith, and we've discussed some of those ideas in the past, but particularly the idea of the iconography. I'm wondering, please, somebody that knows more than we do, tell us in the comments to this. Give us some feedback, and we'll include it in our next episode.
Well, that's another thing I think is really exciting and something I loved about like Ms. Marvel, the idea of getting introduced and get a more kind of in-depth look at a religion I'm not as familiar with. I fucking love that idea. And I really, it would be very exciting to see them pursue that and to show that and to explore that. So like, I think that could be just an amazing thing to watch happen, and a really great way for Westerners to learn more about a culture we don't know as much about as we should.
Let me say, in the Miss Marvel series, my favorite part of that, honestly, was like the mundanity of the family. Yes,
I love the
family. Faith tradition than you, but like their day-to-day life is probably just like your mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like Armand's story is one of continual tragedy. And very particularly some youthful mishaps that I think would lead to potential negative stereotypes for the Islamic faith. So that's where I want to go right now. Because let me tell you something. This book
Let's
wastes
get
no
into
time.
it.
The book starts like not 30 minutes in. You're in this heavy conversation between David Talbot, who again I'd kind of forgotten. David wants to be, at this point in the books, he wants to be the scribe for all of the vampires. He's going to tell everybody's stories and collect the histories. So he's approached Armand for this very purpose. And he and Armand are going back and forth about a lot of things. But Armand gives David this line: "There's no fun.
No such fun on earth like the raping of an equal."
Because he's talking about, I'm gonna take you whether you want it or not, David. David, by the way, let's remember, David is an elderly British man who is currently, and for the rest of time, in a vampiric body of a young Indian man, very attractive, very large. Everybody loves.
Oh, allow me, Joel, a handsome gent, the color of caramel, moving with such cat-like ease and gilded glances that he makes me think of all things once delectable, and now a potpourri of scent: cinnamon, clove, mild peppers, and other spices, golden brown or red, whose fragrances can spike my brain and plunge me into erotic yearnings that live now more than ever to play themselves out. His skin must smell like cashew nuts and thick almond cream. It does.
Listen,
this book has got some real good fucking writing in it, by the way.
So I was way into that before he started talking about how he was gonna rape his equal here, and that was gonna be joyful.
My line's from page 15, the raping line's from page 16.
Yeah, and then they get into the boy fucking too, which is like, and that's, listen, what?
Look.
I mean, we know, we've talked about Anne's sexuality, and I've got my own theories that have been discussed at length, and I'm sure we'll circle back there eventually. But I do wonder, what is her fascination with power play and dominance and in particular non-consensual sex? Can
it be in part due to knowledge and awareness of abuse within the Catholic Church?
I mean, that's obviously, it was the reason why she eventually left the faith completely in her later days. And yeah, absolutely something that she warred with at different times. that, I hadn't thought about it like that. And we have speculated whether that might have been part of Anne's own story that she's never really shared. It just, man, the whole scene with the two of them is rough. Both of them, I'd want to blame Armand on it, but David is just as guilty. Let's go back
he's
on about how lovely he is for a minute, because I want to tell you, I would love for them, and I hadn't thought about it until I saw a trailer for a new movie, and it's the directing debut of an actor that I've been a big fan of for a while. Have you seen the trailer for The Monkey Man?
I haven't.
Okay.
Who's directed? Who directs it?
Dev Patel, and he stars
Shut
in
up.
it too. Listen,
I love him.
I do too, and it hadn't occurred to me until that trailer, but him in that trailer, I went, oh, holy shit, he should be the body thief and David Talbot after the transformation.
Oh.
I don't think they're going to go this way, because I think Eric Bogosian as Daniel Malloy is going to fulfill the role of David Talbot effectively in the series. But if you were going to make the character and you were going to do the tell of the body thief story and what comes afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Dev Patel does smell like almonds, I bet.
I bet he does.
Cashews. There you go.
My God.
Here's something else that I noticed in this scene, and I liked it a lot. Armand loves rings and fancy things, fine jewelry, clothing. He lives for a time in the Night Island off Miami, and it's like this opulent Paris, not Paris, but paradise that he builds for himself. All of that comes from his childhood, when he was not only impoverished, but also shown that fine things were evil. His father's such a asshole. And like anything beautiful or lovely or nice is of the devil, effectively. My client, I've got a client named Rene Rodriguez, and he says in his workshops that we either work, generally most of us do, to heal our past or honor our past. Somebody who showed up for us, and so we're trying to be like that for somebody else, or somebody wasn't there and we're making sure that we are there for whoever in our future, in our path. I think this is a place where Armand is absolutely working for centuries and centuries to heal his past. And it was sort of lovely for me to notice that. I'm like, oh, he likes fancy things because Papa said he couldn't. And not just Papa, but everybody.
And maybe part of that is that vibe you get from him that I feel that's kind of like that edge of like petulance. And maybe that's part of it too. It's that like, no, I'm reclaiming these things. I'm reclaiming these moments in time. I'm reclaiming my childhood. I'm reclaiming some of the space I'm going to hold for baby Armand that didn't get what he should have gone. Or Andre, I guess that was his name.
Yeah, I do. I wonder about that too. Like, are we going to is Armand not the real name? And are they going to go with Andre? Are they going to go with something, whatever the equivalent is? Where is he going to be from? Where was Armand born in the series? I can't wait to find these things out.
Yeah. Like that whole story can be completely different and still be exactly right. Like that's the best thing about the way that the changes they've made in the show. I think that's something that we've really enjoyed, is that it's still the exact like journey the character's on is the same. They're just going there in a little bit of a different way, and it's absolutely perfect and still very true to the characters themselves.
In my initial read of this series, and in the many times that I reread it when I was a youth, Marius was always about my third favorite character.
Oh yeah.
I know, and we know this from the fandom's reaction as they read through the novels during season 1's run, and when all the discussion was happening there, the fandom is pretty against Marius as a rule. They are really harping on all the fuckery that he's responsible for.
I mean,
and much less enamored by his wisdom and Roman ways. Here's my question here that really struck me in this book. He denies himself a companion. He won't turn Armand, but not just Armand. He won't have a real equal. He won't create himself a companion. Clearly longs for that partnership, though.
Well, he leaves the true companion he has, because she's too headstrong, because she's too much, because she's too too much like him, because she demands too much, because she wants to be a part of everything, because she wants to be a part of those who must be kept. She gets to drink from Akasha, like she gets those gifts that are meant just for Marius. And I think that that's like something that's really interesting about his relationships with his fledglings and with his big loves.
It was so interesting to me too in this novel, the absence of those who must be kept, right? Remembering that Armand literally doesn't know. Like he
doesn't tell Armand.
He never,
and
he'll never knows until
you'll never be an equal.
Yeah.
You'll never be an equal with Marius if you don't know those things.
Yes, yeah, and honestly, in retrospect, again, you're like backfilling all of this information, but in a world where Armand spends hundreds of years in the dark and Lestat just shows up and Marius spills all the beans,
everything
I'd
him.
Hate Lestat too if I was Armand.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even really think about that. That would be a real point of jealousy if I knew. And he can't read Marius's thoughts, but he can fucking read Lestat's, and he's sitting right there. And so you can see every moment that he spent with your beloved Marius, who loved you more than anything.
I do wonder, though, why does Marius torture himself like this? So he doesn't want to make another vampire. He doesn't want to turn these boys. He wants Armand to grow old and powerful and prosperous as a human. And that's his plan for all of these boys, basically. But why would you do that? Like, I mean, he loves them in his own monstrous way. He does have sex with Armand, but it's like, because of the time period and his Roman raising, I'm sure Marius wouldn't have thought anything of that as far as a negative for these boys. It's like education for their future or whatever. But why does he do it?
Oh, what is it though? I think he does plan to turn Armand eventually, because I kept the spot, and this is around page 41, where he sees Marius for the first time. Marius comes to him, and he's going to take him in, and he says, "I'm dying, master. What was my language? I can't say even now what it was, but he understood me. No, little one, you're not dying. You're coming now into my protection. And perhaps if the stars are with us, if they are kind to us, you'll never die at all."
Well, but that was after the attack, right? I think if the attack hadn't happened...
No, this isn't. This is when...
Oh, that's just when he had been out on the street and got sick.
Yeah, no, this is like even before. I think this is when he's very first taking him in. When he's very first... When he buys him from like the slaver. Yeah. When he's first like bringing him into his household. Because right before that...
That almost makes it worse, though. Because then it's like it's like Nandor. Well, probably eventually I will turn you, Guillermo.
Right.
But not today.
Perhaps I'll kill you tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Most likely I'll kill you tomorrow, Dread Pirate Roberts.
So that's my biggest question about Marius and this whole thing is like, what is his plan and why does he do this? Why I mean, other than he feels like it's charity, but there are better ways to provide for mortals as a wealthy immortal benefactor. Look at some of the things that Lestat does along the way with less impact on the humans' lives than this, although he's not great at it either, I suppose.
Right.
He never kept a house full of boys, I'll just say that.
Well, and I think part of this is Marius wanting to create an environment that he's in control of, he feels safe in, after everything because this is coming off the heels of some shit going down real hard in Rome and him and Pandora being separated. And I think if you take all that into account, it's kind of like him building this like little bit of heaven on earth for himself. Now, why it needs to be so many boys, I do not know. But I like to think it's because he's not diddling all of them, but he's teaching and protecting them. These are boys that would be in a bad situation if not for him. He's giving them a chance. He's this like wealthy kind of benefactor that's going to help them become successful men in life. And then he's got his Armand on the side, because his relationship with Armand is not like with the other boys. Armand sleeps in his chamber. The other boys do not. Like, that's not something that happens. So it does seem like this is a very different relationship than what he has with the other young men that live in his home.
Yeah, yes, generally. Although, and I don't have the quote written here somewhere in my notes, but I felt like there was one line from one of the older boys when Armand first gets there that seems to imply that like Armand is the new favorite, as in there might have been someone that Armand had sort of displaced.
Previous.
Yeah, I do wonder if that was the. Maybe I'm read into something that wasn't there, but that was my takeoff from it. There's a great section not long after Armand is turned, though, that I thought was, again, like we're talking about this fascination with pedophilia. Let's call it what it is. It seemed every man in the room was taking my measure. And understand, these were not lovers of boys. These were merely Italians of their time, who, fathering children as was required of them, and debauching women any chance they got, nevertheless appreciated a plump and juicy young man, the way that men now might appreciate a slice of golden toast heaped with sour cream and the finest black caviar. I couldn't help but smile. Kill them, I thought. Slaughter them. Oh, that's before his turn. He's saying that to Marius. He and Marius are in the room, and the men are basically like deciding who's going to take. Armand.
That's when they are going to see the people that have been threatening Bianca, right?
Yes.
That's what that is. Yeah.
And it's like the two or three that are mouthing off about how tasty Armand's going to be when they get a hold of him. And Marius is kind of letting it unfold. And then he said, yeah, kill them, slaughter them all, actually, which Marius does with aplomb. It's like one of the more satisfying parts of the book.
Yeah, it's really great. I love that part.
But it's interesting to me, again, like I don't know if it's self-loathing or what, but Marius's opinion of vampires generally is so low. It seems like he just tells Armand so freaking little. And I know he never anticipated the end of things, right? But still, God, we wonder in retrospect why Lestat is such a bad, maker. Well, he had
really bad examples.
Oh my God, he had 3 terrible examples in a row between Marius and Armand and Magnus. So
I think there's something about Marius to be said for. I think that those who must be kept became a bit of an ego thing for him. Like he was the chosen one to care for them. No one else could do this. I can't trust anyone else. I can't even trust Pandora, even though she's been accepted by them. I can't let anyone help me except this handsome young boy that I would like to suck his blood. And then no one else. But this is my thing. And it makes me very important and very big in the vampire world. And so I think he's got also just his past. He is an elitist for sure, without a doubt. Like he's definitely looking down on vampires who are a little bit more bedraggled and choose to live a more like I guarantee you this guy does not enjoy Lestat's mom and her like dirty fingernails and shit. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like he is a bit highbrow and he's a bit of a snob.
He is very much a snob. You're right. You're absolutely right. It had never really occurred to me, but just then as you were describing it, my grandmother, God rest her soul, had a bad habit of taking on responsibility of some sort or another from the family, like even without any discussion, just adopting it, but then continually complaining and reminding everyone of that responsibility that she adopted.
Oh, God, yes.
No one could have done without it, right? That's basically... Marius is like, you fucking vampires. You'd all have fried in the sun if I hadn't spent the last millennia taking care of these 2 bastards.
Right. And they're assholes. And I done it by myself.
And the rest of the vampire
I can't trust
population...
any of you fuckers.
Well, that's the rest of the vampire population is like, do you need some help, Marius? And Marius is like, no, you can't know where they are. Don't worry
Absolutely not. Shut up. They're not real. What are you talking about? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this book...
Like, again, even as trusted Marius, even as trusted Armand, like, and I guess in retrospect, like, well, again, there's no... And we talked about this even before this novel. There is no argument to be made for Marius waiting 3 centuries, 2 centuries, whatever it was, to run into Armand again. He's alive. He's stuck in this coven. And you don't ever... He could have burned that entire coven from without and never been in danger. Like, we know that. Anyway. very frustrating. Poor
Yeah, no,
Armand.
he just leaves him there. Yeah, that Marius does come out of this looking like quite a dick, to be honest. Like I didn't read it that way the first time I read it, but like as a grown ass person, I'm like, Jesus Christ, this asshole.
Well, and I wonder if you've got the benefit. You're ahead of me now. You've read Pandora already. I'm wondering if seeing it from her point of view maybe gives him a little bit more grace and color. Or do we just see his flaws from a romantic standpoint as well?
Well,
as a
you
mentor
see it in a very different way, for sure, because it is very much this like inability. Well, we'll get into it. We'll discuss that book, but it's very much this like inability to have a give and take with an actual partner, and it is it's very, very interesting. Their relationship is awesome. I find it fascinating, and it's to me it's the most like on even ground relationship that we see him have. And so, and it's even more interesting because we see Pandora later. She's just such a broken version of herself. And I mean, there's a lot of layers to that bullshit and what men do to women and all that jazz.
Ain't that the truth?
You know, like it's just this very interesting because they're very much on equal footing. When he turns her, and he does it out of necessity. He didn't want to do it at all. She had been begging. She'd been like, yeah, I could totally be a vampire. I'd kill it.
You know, I think I'm on board for already saying this on the podcast, but in case I haven't, I'll say it out loud here again. When the TV show The Vampire Diaries was on the air, they eventually came out with the spinoff, which was really a prequel called The Originals, right? I think the same thing could happen here with Interview with a Vampire. If you actually want to make a sideshow about the vampires, make it about Marius and Pandora and tell those stories. You could make it over centuries and centuries of time and still have those two as the main two characters and introduce all sorts of side characters as we go. That's also got the, exciting thing that at least Pandora believes herself to have be a reincarnated vampire, which is the first time it comes. Like even Marius is perplexed by the idea.
Yeah, she has like memories and but she also goes through these fucking trippy like Greek god. What are they like? Drug induced. Yeah. So there's all kinds of crazy shit that happens. But they're just that story. I really wanted so much more of that story. I want those two to find each other again and fix their shit. I think that's what Marius needs. He needs a partner. That's what he needs. And ever since he left her, it's been trying to fill that hole with anything but her.
Mostly little boys,
mostly young boys.
Yeah,
mostly young boys and handsome young vampires.
I hate to make the crack, but it's true.
No.
Here's the thing. Pandora is really interesting to me. Her story, especially because that is the one area really of these novels that I feel like is the least explored and yet the most interesting and compelling. That book's so short in comparison to the rest of the series. And I'll tell you why. There's a line in here, actually, and I made note of it. So at this point, when the novels are coming out, you got to remember, she's put Lestat in a coma.
Right.
And then we go a very brief period of time, and everybody's like, what's coming next? What's coming next? And then the announcement is made, and it's like all these things at once. We get Armand is like about to release when she announces it, but also she lets us know that there's this new series that she's going to do, New Tales of the Vampires. And Pandora is announced and Vittorio the Vampire is announced, but she says, there's going to be a bunch of these. And they're going to be shorter novels and really focus on like one character at a time. We're going to hear lots of versions of these different things and more stories that you haven't heard yet. Well, there's a line in this one from Armand, this novel about Armand, I should say. Armand is talking about, like, he's caught up with his own backstory, and he's beginning to talk about the other books that have happened, but from his own perspective. And he very much cuts through it quickly and says something to the effect of, I don't want to talk about the past. And it occurred to me, I think Anne might have felt that way. I wonder how much these novels were not basically directives from publishing. Like, Anne, great, you're on a journey. You're doing some interesting things. That's good. Do you want checks, Anne? You're a vampire sale. You need to write some of these vampire novels. And she's like, Lestat's not speaking to me. And they're like, great.
Talk to someone else.
Yeah.
Talk to someone else, babe. Pick up the phone.
Did, but I mean, like, Vittorio is such a small and completely disconnected novel. It's not even, he literally says at the beginning, I don't know anything about the Coven of the Articulate, as they call themselves, and then tells his little story, small story, disconnected basically completely otherwise. Armand's is connected, obviously, but basically when he, like, if you go to the other novels, you go back to like the Vampire Lestat, when Lestat is telling his version of Interview with the Vampire, he's very much passionate about his version of it and getting the details right, because I think Anne was. Oh, let me revisit some of that and tell it from a different angle. I think at this point, she really did not care to, actually.
Right. She was like, I'm ready to tell some things in the current world we're living in. Well, you know, Gabrielle, we were talking about how much he probably hates Gabrielle, and I totally forgot about this little snippet that I had pulled out that says, Gabrielle, she's around now. This is this is like page 371. She was around on the Night Island. Everyone hates her. She's Lestat's mother and abandons him for centuries, and somehow doesn't manage to heed Lestat's periodic and inevitable frantic cries for help, which, though she could not receive them being his fledgling, could certainly learn of them from other vampiric minds, which are on fire with the news around the world when Lestat is in trouble.
Yeah, I love everybody gives Louis an absolute pass on ever helping Lestat, because they're like, well, Louis is Louis. He's the weakest and dumbest of us. Don't worry about him. You know, he's probably sad somewhere. But like, everybody knows this bitch is like cutting her way through the jungle and just 100%. Can't be bothered. You're like, this is your son, apocalypse after apocalypse, and you don't give a shit.
I forgot I did this. She was in mortal life one of those creatures who always wondered what the others were carrying on about. Gabrielle, low-voiced, unintentionally vicious. Gabrielle, virtually useless to anyone but herself. Some night she'll say something to someone, I suppose. That's interesting. That maybe we were supposed to get a standalone Gabrielle story. Some night she'll say something to someone, I suppose.
I have vague recollections that in an interview or it wouldn't have been Facebook Live back then, I guess. Anyway, I think somewhere on social media sometime, Anne said that she was working on a Gabrielle story. If you think about, there's several hints of her time amongst like the people of the wilderness and different, frontiers of the world, kind of unexplored places. And I feel like there's absolutely the opportunity for, again, kind of like Vittorio, a disconnected, interesting narrative where, there's some sort of ancient evil or a mysterious something, basically a Scooby-Doo episode, except with Gabrielle at the center of
cryptid. Some places, she's some places Mothman or something. Yeah.
Something. Yeah, absolutely.
We do. Something that's interesting about this book, too, is that we get yet another version of the Louis Claudia Theater of the Vampires story. Like, it's our, like, literally our third version of that whole experience this time.
Well, and why Armand tells on himself, too. There's the whole part, and we've discussed it on the show, I think,
worst
previously.
Fucking thing.
But he explains how, he didn't just sacrifice Claudia and he had a deal. She was going to give Louis up, and he was going to give Claudia an adult body. And so he did Dr. Frankenstein on her. But, like, it's so strange that Anne would include it, because it's never revisited anywhere else. It's never expounded upon. Why did he think it was even possible?
It's the most
Why did she
fucking
think it was
horrifying visual to me. Like, the way it's so graphically, like, it's described so horrifically. Like, it's just nauseating the way it's described. And if you loved Claudia, like, I think that I loved Claudia. She was a mess. What a fucking unfortunate creature, And that was just horrifying to think about. A head stitched on a body and it not being able to move right, and this dead body and this vampire head. Oh, God.
Well, the thing that occurred to me during all of that, if he was willing to go that far with her, and it didn't seem like it didn't seem to me in my reading that he knew for a fact it wasn't going to work either. He didn't really care whether it worked or not. But he was fine with the way that it turned out. She was out of the way. But I don't think that his intention was to trick her and just murder her.
No.
So if he was willing to go to those extremes, why not just give her a boatload of blood? And then she'd be super, super powerful and nobody could kill her anyway. And she could go and live. I mean, she could have Gabrielle's story of visiting, the frontiers of the world and doing as she would if she was just a stronger actual vampire. Like, never mind that she's a child.
Right.
I don't know. Anyway, that was a moment there where I was like, yeah, Armand's not only a dick, but he's like an unimaginative dick.
Well, and there's something a little monstrous about it. There's just this it's like the monster's name isn't Frankenstein. That's the doctor's name, but the monster's Frankenstein. It's got that kind of fucking feel to it. It's like, it's just kind of a monstrous thing to have done to someone. And then to have to hide it and to it's just gross. Like, every bit of that's so gross.
Well, but it's like, oh my God. But like, sharing the fact that he would share it like this to David and then know David was going to write it down. Like, that's monstrous in its own way. Like, you don't realize that that's going to fucking destroy Louis and Lestat when they get around to reading it? Like,
oh, here it is. I could not strike from my mind the faltering image of her girlish head and tumbling curls, fixed awkwardly with gross black stitching to the flailing, faltering, falling body of a female vampire whose discarded head I'd thrown into the fire. Oh, what a grand disaster was that. The child-headed monster woman, unable to speak, dancing in a frantic circle, the blood gurgling from her shuddering mouth, her eyes rolling, arms flapping like the broken bones of invisible wings.
He does have a way with the words, don't he?
Being condemned and therefore being nothing and no one, she was a perfect specimen for my whim.
Ooh.
Asshole. Asshole.
Okay, there is a moment later when we get all the way caught up with the narrative of Memnoch the Devil, and Armand is recounting that. I appreciated the fact that he could not help but remind us all that Lestat really enjoyed period blood.
Because we'll never let that go.
He's like, you guys remember Lestat nasty, right?
Remember this?
Yeah, I'm Frankenstein, but Lestat nasty, y'all.
That's yep. Yikes. Way to bring it back up. Let's stay with that.
So here's my thing. Why, other than perhaps the publishing pressure that might have been making our Lady Anne write these novels where she revisited the stories of seemingly, especially in Armand's case, a character that she doesn't seem to have the same love for that she does for some of the others. Why do this? Why did I want to reread it? And the biggest thing that I got out of it was, even a character that is less sympathetic to you, even a character who seems to be, like in Armand's case, one of the things one of the reasons why I'm not so drawn to him is because he does seem uncurious in a way that the other characters are more striving and searching. Armand, I don't want to say low IQ because that's not
no,
it. He's
simple, but simple.
Yes, simple. And this novel, though, and rereading it this time, absolutely made me identify with him and understand him in that simplicity in a way, and empathize with him in that simplicity in a way that I hadn't previously. So I'm glad that I revisited it, and my guess is that was Anne's part of her journey in this novel as well, was like learning to love this character that she had left lacking sometimes in his own attitudes and behaviors.
Well, I am glad to have a fuller vision of how this character came to be, how this vampire came to be, why he is the way he is. And you do understand him a lot more after reading this. You understand that he grew up in a fucking brutal environment, and then had this experience with Marius and had a family and had, this lovely life that was then torn from him, and then to toil in superstition and fear, and to go from a beautiful place full of light and love and art and beauty to this dismal existence, you know, and then to have someone come along like Lestat who reinvigorates his desire to participate and to be in the world and to be part of the world, and he has a jealousy immediately of him, you know, and then to have this lover of Lestat come into the picture and this chance to start something anew, and also perchance to have some fuckery against a guy you don't like that much, you know, and then it's just it's a really it's definitely creates more sympathy for him. It definitely gives the character more depth. The character that was a little bit flat, that, you know, our Louis is not as great of a storyteller as Lestat, and our Louis didn't love Armand as much as he loved our Claudia. And so you get a different version of Armand there too, and then you get a different version of Armand in Blood and Gold, which we haven't hit yet. So there's just I'm glad that she spent some time really working on that character and why he was compelling to so many of our sweet loves.
You know, in the most recent trailer for season 2 of Interview with the Vampire, it starts off with Claudia asking Louis, "Who are you, Louis? Without me, without him, who are you?" This novel was that journey for Armand. Without Marius, without Louis, without Lestat, without, you know, in all of the other novels, Armand is in opposition to or in companionship with one of our protagonists. And in this one, he just gets to live on his own. Interesting, compelling, still not my favorite, but well worth the revisit. I'm excited.
Absolutely. It's definitely worth a reread.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. And thank you all for joining us on that discussion. Ashley, you and I are just getting started with this thing. We're going to be back next episode, and we're going to talk about something that we're both very much more excited about, honestly, than this novel, even though it had its good parts. That first episode of Interview with the Vampire Season 1 is coming our way for a rewatch.
Oh, is it rewatch time, Joel?
It goes down so smooth. I can't wait to get.
Are we treating ourselves to a delicious rewatch, everyone? Yes, we are.
Yes. So again, I want to tell you, if you haven't seen the series yet, don't listen to these episodes first. Go back and listen to us watching them for the first time too, so that we don't spoil anything for you as we go through. Because this time we are going to be drawing our notes from the whole season as a whole, and things that they're alluding to, things that they're hinting towards, things
probably more of the tie-ins with the books too, like things we recognize, things we've had time to think about and marinate on.
I'm excited. God, it's
I am
good.
too.
Well, listen, we suffered through a long off season, and before that, we suffered through. We
had like 5 years.
Season. Listen, I'll say this: at least Mayfair season 2, we know what we're getting, probably.
Oh no! Here's the thing: I am fully buckling up for just the hilarity of it. Like, if it's anything other than completely absurd, I don't even know if I'll be able to handle it.
Yeah, that's where I am too. Come on, Mr. Levine.
I can't wait. Well, I'm actually pumped about that now. Now that we've talked about it so much.
Levine. Oh,
that's
my
right.
Goodness. Okay. Ashley, thank you for joining me and revisiting this novel, The Vampire Armand. Our next novel, by the way, is Pandora. We'll probably get to that after our rewatch of season 1, and maybe even before our initial watch of season 2 of Interview with the Vampire gets here. Although I don't think we'll be visiting any of those storylines in this season. I don't. No way. With some of the Armand backstory, I think so. That'll be interesting to see play out. You can find us on Facebook and in all the other places. Let us know what you thought about this novel and all of our episodes so far. Thanks to everybody who's been listening and reviewing the show and giving us feedback there. And until the next time we talk to you, we've been your hosts. I'm Joel.
I'm Ashley.
And we are the Articulate Coven. Thanks for listening to The Articulate Coven. You can join our community on Facebook by following the links in the show notes or searching for Articulate Coven on Facebook. You can subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or at articulatecoven.com. And share us with your Anne Rice loving friends.